The big question about Point Break is how it differs or how similar it is to the original. And the answer is that it's really quite different. So if you're hoping an honest remake or a specific remake of the original, then you'll probably be a little bit disappointed. It's more like an inspiration of the first film. So keep that in mind if you're going into this film. But let's talk about the content. It sounds a lot more, I guess, offensive, or not offensive, but it sounds a lot more dramatic than it is on screen. In fact, like if you look at the violence and I suppose the nudity, there's everything you see in the trailer really it kind of sums it up. So yeah, there is a bit of violence. I mean, you know, when you say things like there's bank robberies and theft and people wearing masks and things like that, it can sound ominous, but you'll see on the trailer how it's presented. There are people that are shot, there's a shootout, and there's, you know, some bare knuckle fist fighting, which looks very aggressive and seems to probably be the most, I guess, kind of violent scene of the film in terms of one-to-one combat. And there's car chases and cars being rammed and collisions and that kind of thing. But I guess the main thing to be aware of is there's several deaths. Some of them aren't very intimate at all, they just kind of happen off screen. You know, people get shot, caught in gunfire. You don't really see them being killed or anything, but you know that they would have been shot. But there's a couple of lingering moments with deaths. Two of them are when people fall, one of them deliberately, from very, very high cliff ledges. And these are quite dramatic just because of the action of it happening, and also you really do sort of get the sense of just how far they fall and just how fatal the death would be, the plummet would be. There is also a close-up of someone, and they're a kind of a close character. You see a close-up of them after they've been shot, and they're covered in blood, their head's covered in blood, so that's a little bit bloody. And there is another scene when someone is kind of nursing somebody who's just being shot, and this is a person, again, who is close to them. So the death is kind of lingered upon, and there's a bit of mourning and grief over this person. It's not quite clear if they're actually dead or dying at that point, but you get the picture. So there's a few other, other things, like there's different levels of theft and that kind of stuff. But that really is it in terms of the violence. There's a bit of shouting and name calling and a tiny bit of tension. But considering it's Point Break, there actually isn't a whole lot of tension in the film. And again, with the blood and gore, there isn't really any gore, but there is a bit of blood. So you do see, apart from this fellow who's, the corpse is covered in blood around his head, you see a little bit of bloody noses and bloody cuts and scratches, bloody faces and bloody mouth and that kind of thing. But there isn't, again, it's not focused on. You'll just sort of know that person's been punched and they have a little bit of trickling blood. So if that gives you an idea. There is one kind of funeral scene, or it's not really clear. There's a funeral pyre. It isn't explained where the body is. There's a mild suggestion that the body is actually in the funeral pyre, which is a little bit odd because we know that it takes a certain amount of heat, a lot of heat to burn a body. So it'd be a bit of a weird thing to do. And it's also in a kind of party rave setting as well. So again, it would be weird for the body to be in there. But there is an implication that it might be, which is a bit weird. There is a little bit of sex and nudity in the film. Well, not really nudity. There's a sex scene between a couple. It kind of starts with a bit of undressing and kissing, and they're both sort of leaning down on the bed, and then it's over. You do see some photographs of them having sex a bit later, but again, you don't see any nudity or any sexual actions or anything. There's a lot of skimpy clothing through the film, so swimwear and tight-fitting clothing and that sort of stuff, but you don't see any genitals or any breasts or anything like that. So it's fairly mild in that sense. There is some drug use in the film. In one scene, it looks like people are sharing a joint, and there's a scene where it's implied that some drugs are thrown overboard from a ship. It isn't, again, lingered upon, so it's just kind of there and then it's gone. There is some other drinking in the film, just different types of alcohol, and there is some smoking as well. But these are far from the major themes of the film. Bit of swearing. The S word is used a fair few times, as well as the A word, and some name calling, a few religious references and obscene finger gestures. But again, it's overall it is quite mild. In the screening I went to, there was a couple of kids around the age of 11 and 12, and they really enjoyed the film. They didn't find it in any way offensive or kind of or naughty or rude or violent or anything like that. So it was quite mild to them. In fact, they thought it was a little bit lame compared to some of the other stuff they've watched. So yeah, my target audience, I think, for this is probably from around that 12 to 13-year-old up to the older teenager, young adult group are probably the most likely to enjoy this. In fact, the best part of the film is really the cinematography. Forget about the plot, forget about all of that. It's a little bit non-existent, but the sports cinematography. I'm going to try that again. The sports cinematography in the film is absolutely breathtaking. So it's worth watching just for that. There's a lot of extreme sports which are represented in the film. So to be able to see that from the point of view of the actors from the cast is quite lovely. And on the big screen, it really is quite breathtaking. There's some jaw-dropping shots which are used in the scene, and that really is probably the best thing about the film. So Point Break stars Édgar Ramírez and Luke Bracey and is directed by Ericson Core. And like I said, there isn't a huge amount of content to be concerned about if you're taking a younger one to see the film. But if you want to have a closer look at the content that is in the film, then by all means have a look on my website, which is cinemum.net.